Good day everyone. So according to HX Look here on Twitter, Kokomi has now fallen into the A tier with a below 30% usage rate in the Spiral Abyss. This is taken from a sample size of over 160,000 people. Now, whether you believe this or not is really irrelevant. What I really want to talk about is the current Spiral Abyss and what this might mean for us as Kokomi players. So the first halves have a final boss that is just purely made of hydro, so this clearly favors characters like Xiangling that can just constantly vaporize off of it, and it also means that running something like, let's say, a mono hydro team in the first half with Kokomi and Farina is just not going to be as feasible. Similarly, running stuff like Taser and even something like Ayaka Freeze, where you can't really freeze the boss on this first chamber and on the last chamber, it just means that there is going to be less usage for Kokomi in terms of her support and even her DPS capabilities in some teams. But regardless of that, you can still use Kokomi very efficiently here on the second halves, most notably using a Nilo Bloom team. I remember when Nilo Black first came out, a lot of people said that Thunder Manifestation is going to be a counter to the Nilo Bloom teams, but a lot of people forgot that with Nehida, you basically have that the Tri-Karma Purification is constantly being triggered because the enemy has an Electro Aura on them. So if you pay careful attention, despite the fact that the aura flips to Hydro, it very quickly flips back to Dendro. So this just shows you that as long as you can just get your damage to the enemy or the Hydro to the enemy, you'll generate bountiful Bloom cores and you'll just do a lot of damage. It certainly is not a counter. Even something like your Mono Hydro teams, your Taser teams, your Kokomon, or even an Ayaka Freeze team can be run. You can run them very efficiently on the second half. So all of the usual Kokomi teams are still available, and that also despite the fact that on the second halves you have a bunch of enemies carrying a Geo Shield. You'll see in just a bit that this really doesn't matter. It's all just about you getting your damage on the field, and because we've got so many enemies, or like a bunch of enemies in AoE, this just allows Kokomi to shine so well. You can freeze these enemies, you can do so many things, but you can see that Hydro is just constantly ticking on all the enemies. One of my favorite things here is using a Kokomi charge attack to launch the enemies, but since we're obviously now just playing here with the C6 characters, well, you can see we're just like running through them very quickly, but I did show in my last video how you can just have a bit of fun. Regardless, this is not a speed run or anything, this is just me just having a bit of fun with these teams and seeing how we can just take care of them. Certainly from my perspective, regardless of the fact that the majority of people might not value Kokomi as much anymore, I still think that there is plenty of usage, or like plenty of use for her. It's also interesting to note that because the fact that we get more and more characters in the game, and that the content offering of the game, in other words, the fact that we only really have like the Spiral Abyss to test our characters out, means that you are eventually going to have to make choices. People are clearly going to favor more recent units like Farina, Nuvalet and Navia, and this just means that the amount of usage for someone like Kokomi is just naturally going to decline. It doesn't really, or a decline in usage rates doesn't necessarily mean that the character is not viable anymore. It just means that given the limited content that we have in the game, well, people are just going to play with the newer characters. So from a Kokomi perspective, nothing really has been lost. In anything, you can still just run the usual, but it certainly is sad that Hoyo is not pushing more content, but they are just giving constant TCG updates, something we can definitely talk about in a future video. Regardless, let me know what you're using currently in the Spiral Abyss. If you find it fun, certainly a much easier Abyss, but I look forward to hearing what you have to say. Thanks for watching.